Coming up, this week saw the COVID Enquiry throw out some shocking revelations about the sheer nastiness and dysfunction at the heart of Boris Johnson's government. Much of the evidence is being reported in the mainstream media, but what this video will specifically look at is the Conservative government's unwavering focus on Brexit in the midst of a global health crisis. The evidence presented this week shows that the obsession with extricating Britain from the European Union siphoned attention, resources and political will from the pressing need to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic with fatal consequences. Stay tuned. I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button, subscribe and above all share a link to this video with your social media contacts. The timeline is telling. As the coronavirus began its silent and swift spread across the world, the UK government, led by Boris Johnson, was embroiled in negotiations with the EU, attempting to forge a new relationship post-Brexit. The bandwidth of the government was stretched thin, with both the Prime Minister and his cabinet giving priority to the "Get Brexit Done" mantra, devoting their attention to trade deals and border discussions rather than on the looming health emergency. The distraction of Brexit had tangible effects. Key meetings on pandemic preparedness were missed or sidelined by ministers. And the shopping trolley, Boris Johnson himself, decided not to bother attending 5 meetings of the government's key Cobra committee as the health crisis was gathering pace. The respective advisory committees on severe respiratory viruses and pandemic influenza, which should have been at the forefront of planning, were not given the urgent attention that they should have been by a dogma-driven government focused solely on Brexit. The result was a delayed response to COVID-19, with lockdowns implemented later than advised by many public health experts. The consequences of this delay could be measured in human lives. The UK's death toll climbed, exacerbated by the lack of early action. The government's own exercises in pandemic preparedness, such as the 2016 Operation Cygnus, had highlighted vulnerabilities in the NHS and the public health infrastructure. Yet the findings were lost in the noise of the Leave campaign's victory in the advisory Brexit referendum. So when COVID-19 struck, the NHS was underprepared and under-resourced, a situation that could have been mitigated with earlier decisive action without the distraction of Brexit. Moreover, the government's messaging was muddled. The very same ministers who had very clearly and successfully made the "take back control" mantra of the Brexit campaign stick were now sending the public very mixed signals on lockdown measures and public health guidelines. This inconsistency eroded public trust and compliance at a time when unity and clarity were paramount. The inquiry into the government's handling of the COVID-19 crisis is laying bare these missteps. Testimonies from public health officials and internal government communications have painted a picture of a government so consumed by Brexit that it failed to protect its most vulnerable citizens. The cost of this Brexit distraction has been steep, measured not just in GDP, money or trade deficits, but in the lives of literally thousands of Britons. As the country grapples with the aftermath of these twin crises, the pandemic and Brexit, the evidence suggests that the government's single-minded pursuit of Brexit may have come at the expense of its most fundamental duty, safeguarding the lives of its people. Remember, Boris Johnson won the 2019 election on the "Get Brexit Done" mantra, having selected only Brexit hardliners to stand as Conservative candidates in that election. A less dogma-driven government, faced with the looming global pandemic that threatened to kill millions and was clearly going to be the worst health crisis in the UK for over 100 years, well, a less dogma-driven, less populist government would have made the rational decision to call a humanitarian pause, to borrow a phrase, and delay leaving the European Union until the crisis had passed, so they could give their full attention to protecting the elderly and the vulnerable from this fatal disease. But no, this populist government pressed on regardless with their prioritisation and cult-like devotion to the Brexit project, ignoring the cost in human lives. One figure that has been frequently cited is the higher death rates in the UK compared to other countries, especially during the early stages of the pandemic. For instance, by the end of 2020, the UK had one of the highest COVID-19 death rates per capita in the world. I would suggest that this reflects delays in the Tory government implementing lockdowns to try to protect their corporate donors' interests, their corrupt and inadequate provision of personal protective equipment for healthcare workers, and their corrupt practices within the multi-billion-pound test and trace system, both in their appointments of Tory crony Dido Harding and the like, and in the allocations of contracts for consultancy, and so on. The system has been found to have made no material difference to the spread or deadliness of the pandemic. And even as I record this video, I can predict the Tufton Street trolls and the few remaining Brexit cult members leaving comments under this video saying, "Yeah, but what about the vaccine? Couldn't have done that without Brexit. Sovereignty, innit? Take back control." At this point in history, you have to wonder if even they really still believe this myth. The truth is that the success of the vaccine rollout speaks to the strengths of the UK's scientific community and healthcare system, and the idea that it had anything whatsoever to do with Brexit is stretching things too far, despite the claims of the Brexit cult. The Conservative government has often been keen to link the success of the UK's vaccine rollout to its Brexit campaign, but the reality is that the two events have no connection whatsoever. The UK's vaccine programme benefited from the work of an international consortium of scientists, including those from EU countries. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, a linchpin of the UK's rollout, was developed through a partnership that crossed borders, with significant contributions from European scientists and institutions. On top of that, the UK's regulatory body, the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, the MHRA, has long been a leader in its field, respected and robust in its independence from government. It was the MHRA's swift action, not Brexit, that allowed for the early approval of the vaccine. The MHRA would have acted just as decisively while the UK was still a member of the EU, as it had powers to do so in the case of any public health emergency. And just to really expose the nonsense behind the myth that the successful vaccine rollout was as a result of Brexit, while the government's investment in vaccine development and procurement predated the UK leaving the European Union. The Vaccine Task Force, established in April 2020, operated under EU regulations. The UK's decision to opt out of the EU's vaccine procurement programme was not a byproduct of Brexit, but was a separate decision entirely, and was a decision that any EU member state also had the autonomy to make if they chose. In other words, nothing to do with Brexit. However much the Brexit cult tried to push the narrative of the vaccine rollout being a Brexit benefit, a symbol of plucky little Britain's self-sufficiency and independence, the vaccine rollout success was demonstrably nothing to do with Brexit. It was the result of international collaboration, including with European Union member countries, scientific endeavour, and the hard work of our amazing NHS. To conflate Brexit with the vaccine rollout is insulting the NHS and ignoring its critical role in the successful deployment of the vaccine. The NHS has been the backbone of the UK's health response, and its structure and reach, even after the underinvestment and mismanagement by Tory governments over the last 13 years, is that allowed for an effective rollout. The COVID inquiry is only 4 weeks into its hearings, and it's set to continue until 2026. But already, it's showing the shocking levels of dysfunction, bullying, misogyny, stupidity, arrogance, contempt for the elderly and vulnerable, and the willingness to value the economy over human lives. Or maybe not so shocking thinking about it. Each one of those attributes wouldn't be out of place in a word cloud relating to the post-Johnson Conservative Party. We've probably seen nothing yet, but as the inquiry continues on its way, I wanted to just record this video specifically to provide a sobering reflection on the costs of political distraction during a global health emergency.
Welcome to the Brexit, sir. I'm sorry.
Oh my God.